Hello and welcome to another episode of Gotham Sound TV. I am really very excited to bring this episode with the sound team behind Anora, the film Anora. In the studio, Boris, how you doing?
Hello.
Production sound mixer, Boris Krichevsky. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you for having me.
Excellent. And a special super surprise guest, Boris's boom operator, Brian Kuciak. Did I get that right?
You got that right. Thank you.
Excellent. And joining us from California, we have Andy Hay. Andy, hi, how you doing?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for having us.
You bet. And John Warrin. John, great to see you. Great to see you both.
Thanks, Peter.
It's rare that we get the production sound mixer and the post-production team together. It's even more rare to have the production sound mixer and the boom operator and the post-production team together. So I am really, really very excited to, be able to facilitate this discussion about the movie Anora. So first of all, if you haven't seen Anora, we'll sort of go through the plot in a second. But if you haven't seen it, you should go see it. We will avoid as many spoilers as possible. But I have a feeling that I may let it slip, but we'll do our best to avoid that. There's also some foul language involved in some of the clips that we're going to show, potentially. So there's that. And then just right at the top, I want to thank Neon, the distributors, for getting us some clips and really facilitating this discussion. The thing that compelled me to get this going is I saw Anora in the theater, and I remember texting you, Boris, like, we have to talk about this, that this production sound is incredible. I'm a production sound mixer. That's my background. And so that's what I responded to. The more it sort of sunk in, I realized the sound design is also incredible. But Boris, I want to start with you because I want to sort of follow the natural, flow of how movies start. The call often first goes to the production sound mixer. And so I wonder if you can sort of tell us about your experience of Anora and meeting the director and reading the script.
Yeah, thank you. I happened to meet, I guess, about 3-4 months before production was set to start, happened to meet one of the producers, Alex Coco, while doing reshoots for a different film that he was on. And just in passing mentioned that I am Russian and a native Russian speaker. And he got really excited and said that him and his friend and colleague Sean Baker are working on this film about a lot of Russianness and Russian language is involved. And then a few weeks later, I met Sean, the director, on the phone over Zoom. And we talked about me. They asked me to join originally as a boom op. Originally, I was supposed to join Patrick Southern, who was slated to be the mixer on this film. And I am a sound mixer and a boom op, with a lot of shows in New York. The Russian language is what was key, I think, to them because they wanted a native speaker in the sound department. Because there's a lot of all the Russian actors are native Russian speakers.
So I think this is a good opportunity if people are completely unfamiliar with the movie. It is a kind of a romantic comedy, potentially a gangster film, but takes place in the Russian community, particularly Brighton Beach. And I'm being a little bit funny with my genre descriptions, which I want to talk about in a minute. But is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's a film that flirts with expectations and genre labels intentionally, because, first of all, it's a very exciting film. It's kind of like an action romp, I guess. Part of the excitement is its natural excitement, but part of it is the subversion of expectations and, getting getting someone in the seat to see something else and then showing them something completely different and much more explosive. But yes, it's set in the Russian community, and Karen, who is one of the actors and a close associate of Sean's, who was in all but one, I think, of his films as an actor, they came up with this film many years ago, and this is like an idea that they've been passionate about for a long time. And, Brighton Beach was always kind of appealing, I think, to filmmakers in New York. It is like a unique neighborhood in New York, and Sean used to be a New York. He lives in LA now, but he used to be a New York guy. He's a very like New York filmmaker at the core, I think, and no matter where he makes his films. And Karen is, one of the actors and one of the contributors to the story, not necessarily the writers, but he's a real New York guy too. He's like he runs a furniture store in Queens, right? That's like his.
Amazing. I'm
practice.
sorry. Which character?
He plays Toros.
Oh my God.
He's a really he's a for real guy. You know? And
absolutely.
he's great in this part.
Yes.
It's just him turned up to 11 and meaner than he is in real life. He's a really sweet guy.
That's good to know because he scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. So the film, it's a lot of Russianness, and so I was brought on to help, I guess, keep the Russianness genuine and make sure the sound department has an ear on the Russian aspects of the film, because all the Russian spoken in the film is real. It's not like an English script back translated and then Russian actors interpreting it. It's like it's more like a language was suggested to them and they spoke it. That's why so much slang is contemporary, and so many expressions are so real. Yuri Borisov, who plays Igor, he's like a Russian. I don't know what's the equivalent. Who's the new gladiator? That's
okay.
Of.
No, that
Mescal.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. He's like this, the Russian bad boy of cinema. He's in everything. He has a huge range, and so he's like a fresh, like hot Russian actor in this film, playing like a true Russian. One could even argue he's a little too Russian to be living in Brighton, but I think that serves the film well.
I think his character is perfect. He plays a kind of fixer with a heart of gold.
Yeah,
in a way.
yeah. The Mr. Wolf of this film. Yeah. So yeah, the team was looking to have someone with an ear for the Russian, because there was basically the script soup and myself were the only Russian-speaking crew, except for the talent. And so Sean was looking for, I guess, collaborators, behind the camera to make sure that everything was genuine. And that was, I think, what was most important to him at that time.
I think that's huge. And one thing, I had the honor of thirding on Sopranos. I'm going to really try and talk as little as possible about myself. But one thing that was really gratifying about that is David Chase's dedication to the sound of language. And that, I don't speak Russian, but that really came across.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to think so. And then before we went into production, obviously things changed, and I ended up taking the reins from Patrick. The film got rescheduled last minute, a rescheduling that Patrick couldn't accommodate, and he was like, I have a feeling you're going to get the call next, and that's exactly what happened. And so I took the reins from him and became the mixer, and so the team changed a little bit. Initially, I was actually working with a boom-up named Nikita Zark. He's a great filmmaker and writer in his own right. And he's a Ukrainian native. He's from Odessa originally. We met here in New York. But it was even more international because it was a native Russian-speaking sound department for a little bit, but a Russo-Ukrainian bond, which I think is important, shooting a film now in Russian.
Amen. Yes. Yeah.
And then Nikita departed the production. I was alone for a bit, and then Brian joined the show and was on the show for, until we wrapped. That was the production run of show situation for us.
No, I think that's interesting. I want to throw this question to you, Brian. What is that like, booming in a language that you don't natively speak?
I feel like I ended up not booming a lot of Russian speaking. Or if I did, it's a lot of it's like by feel. There's like a tempo to the dialogue, so you just bump around to that. But I feel like we ended up doing a lot of car stuff.
Yeah, I think by the time you joined, almost all of the Russian that remained was car stuff, which was just us rigging up a car, which was a lot of fun, but not a lot of booming per se, because a lot of people in the car. There's 4 or 5 people in the car at any given moment.
Okay. Andy and John, I want to turn it over to you guys now. When did you get involved in the shoot? And from what I gathered from our initial conversations, you had both worked with the director before. Is that right?
Yeah. So I met Sean on the Florida project. I came in to mix that film for him. Wasn't involved in any of the editorial on that one, but we met on the mix and just had a bang up time, and really enjoyed the work. And so when Sean was getting ready to make Red Rocket, I got the call from him to ask if I'd like to be involved in the supervision in the editorial as well as the mix. And of course, I said yes to that. And I'd been doing some work with John prior to that moment. And we just sort of fell in love with each other's work and respect for each other's work. And we're doing a lot of interesting stuff together. And so I reached out to John and said, hey, do you want to do this together? I think this would be something that, our talents would really overlap in a very positive way that would be really meaningful for Sean's style of filmmaking, which is this, I think people call it sort of neo-realism, right? Where he likes to really sit in reality. And so that partnership made a lot of sense. And so I brought John in. We had an incredible time together on Red Rocket. It was just a big love fest at John's facility over at Esho, where we spent a few weeks together mixing. And so then when it came time for Anora, Alex reached out again, Alex Coco, again, one of the producers, and said, hey guys, we're doing it again. Would you like to come on board? And so, of course, naturally we said yes.
And so when in the process did you start to get involved? Was it completely picture edited? Were you seeing dailies? When did you start to first really see the material?
We didn't see dailies, but they did send over us over some sound. Take a listen to. There was some communication on that. Also, Alex Coco had reached out. He told us the story. So we were kind of involved in all of that, and kind of we knew about it for quite a while. But as far as us seeing the cut, we didn't see it until it was turned over. But the way that Sean works, which is really interesting, is he doesn't do a first pass and then go back. And this is the way, as far as I know he did that on Red Rocket. It's just the way he likes to work, is that he goes really slow through the whole thing. And so we actually had to get started because we had this deadline of submitting to Cannes. And so we had to get started without seeing any of the, I think we got maybe an hour and 20 minutes of a 2.5 hour film. So we got started in doing audio post-production, while Sean's still editing the film. Like, there's no rough cut of that other hour of the film. He's literally hasn't even started on it.
That for people that are not familiar with the normal post-production process, picture lock is the thing, right? Before you guys would normally start to edit sound, you would want to lock picture. That must have been an incredible sort of challenge to be fluid enough to accept a round robin of changes.
Yeah, it's true. We don't always get a locked picture. A lot of films are in sort of a rolling lock when sound has come on board, but there is typically some semblance of a beginning, middle, and end to the picture. We spotted the film and we got to see 4 of the 8 reels. So we got to see, the first half of the movie, right? Yeah. And so as John was saying, Sean cuts in this linear fashion, so he just simply hasn't gotten to that chunk of the film yet while we're beginning on the first half of the film. And so to your point, in terms of changes and so on, there were changes, up until the last minute. We're constantly updating and making changes along the way to accommodate picture changes, new music changes, and so on.
But that said, that Sean he's very, very thorough, so there's not a ton of changes. This one more than Red Rocket, but he's very, he likes to just go slow. So it's not a cut and then redoing a bunch of changes.
Interesting. I have a kind of funny question, but it's something that I think about a lot. How does genre affect your sound design efforts? And how do you classify the genre of Anora?
Yeah, I think as Boris was mentioning up front, it's a bit stealthy in the genre shifts that occur, right? You think you're watching this fantasy rom-com, and it is, a rom-com until it isn't, right? And then there's that shift where, without ruining anything, it takes a pretty severe left turn into more of sort of like a thug thriller, if you will, and then a sort of cat and mouse chase. In terms of like genre being informative, I think what overrides that is, again, Sean's desire for realism.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we can attribute the success of his films to, being so rooted in realism that every moment is utterly believable. And so to speak more on the craft of realism, on the dialogue side, I'm the dialogue and music mixer and supervisor, and John supervises the sound effects design and mixes the sound effects and so on.
And together, are you guys both the sound designers of the film?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how you term sound design, right?
Speaking of controversy, yes.
Yeah. I mean, my view of sound design is like every choice that you make is designing the sound of the film, right? But John is in the sound effects department. Let's put it that way. In terms of like the approach on dialogue, we aim to do as little ADR as absolutely necessary, such that we retain everything that was happening on the day. Thankfully, Boris captured a wealth of riches in terms of microphone choices, the boom, the ISOs, the car with the plant mics and all the various sources there, so that we have great quality recordings to begin with. Because Sean, like I said, like most directors, they're not interested much in ADR. He's interested in representing exactly what happened on the day. The reason he chose this shot, this angle, this is because of the magic that's in that moment. So our job is to preserve that. And he also loves all of the ancillary junk and the grit, that enters the microphones that we might ordinarily in a more conventional film want to strip out. We might want to get out, some of those extraneous sounds that are sort of muddying up the track. But Sean embraces all that stuff. He loves all that stuff. And oftentimes there are happy little accidents that might happen on set that he gets married to and wants to work those in. So we leave all that stuff in. And the challenge then becomes, from a mix perspective, especially in a film like this where there's significant amounts of moments where there are characters overlapping one another and talking on top of one another. And we're trying to give everybody their due, because everybody's got something to say, and it's important that we understand what they're saying, but also maintain that hubbub and that chaos, right? That is so significant in terms of the energy of the film and the energy of these scenes. So you just end up being a bit more brutal and radical with your editing and with your mixing. It's less of a sort of a smooth kind of approach and more of an angular kind of approach, which is a bit more challenging and a bit different to what we're typically used to. So you're working up a bit more of a sweat in terms of the mix. So that's sort of been the approach on the dialogue side. We can talk about music, I think, later on, because I think it's also sound designy, but I think we'll get into that later. But I want to kick it over to John to speak more about the environments and so on.
One great thing is we had a lot of good production crowds and all of this stuff that were like wild recordings that we worked in and were really helpful. I think a lot of people connect with the the realism, and of course that's, like Andy mentioned, this is like super important to Sean. Our direction was not to be hyper realistic, so there was a lot of discussions in all the environments, all the rooms, like what this one sounded like, the distance of this room from that. And it's actually like a discussion of that particular room. So he wants it as real as possible. So a lot of the field recordings we had were really helpful.
I think it's worth mentioning now, there's something that's not typical in terms of the production sound, which is you did record in 32-bit float. Is that right?
Yes, I can feel the judgment from the production sound community.
I mean, screw that.
I agree. 100% screw
yeah, no, you use the tools that are the best suited to the job. There's one thing, and the reason I think that we need to talk about the entire sound department with this is when you look back at like if you were to make a sound map of the film, of the sound design of the film, that includes the production recordings, there's very obvious, to me anyways, there's a very obvious intention behind the volume, both in terms of the crescendo, like how loud it gets, and how quiet it gets. I imagine if it wasn't discovered, if it wasn't baked into the script, I imagine that came about in picture editorial. But it's really, it's an important part of the sound of Anora. I mean, there's one scene where it's like a scream that I saw it in the theater, and then I saw a CAS screener in my apartment last night. I was worried the police were going to be called. And it's immediately followed by a moment of almost total quiet. And I think that it's such a beautiful sort of way to get embraced or embedded into that world that I can't imagine it being done any other way. I think it's worth showing a clip just so people can sort of get a sense of it. This is when Anora first meets Ivan in the club.
No, I know.
Annie,
It's like,
I got a kid who wants someone who speaks Russian.
Jimmy, the girls and I have been talking, and if your cousin doesn't start showing us some respect, we're not gonna tip out anymore.
All right, I'll talk to him.
Who are you talking about, the DJ?
All right, seriously?
He's an asshole.
I shared my playlist with him, and he was very rude and dismissive.
You're killing me. Let's go, come on.
No, I'm eating my food.
That's why you have Tupperware. Keep things fresh.
He's eating
He's a spender, come on, let's go.
Time is money, baby. Get a roll on it.
Without pants, without nothing. And then some fucking erotic dance. One second, bro. Guys, fucking erotic, and then we kicked out. Okay.
Hello, this is the beautiful Annie. She's gonna take care of everything you need tonight. Annie, make me proud.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Прекрасно. I'm Иван, and ты можешь назвать меня просто Ваня.
Vanya, okay.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
И это мой лучший друг, fucking best friend Tom.
Hi, I'm Annie.
Yeah, not bad. And ты должна знать русский, правильно?
No, I don't speak Russian, but I know Russian.
В смысле?
I can speak Russian. I just prefer not to, but you can go ahead and speak Russian. I'll understand.
I don't understand. What the fuck?
Okay.
Yeah.
Привет, Иван.
Бля!
Меня зовут Анни. Это как я говорю по-русски.
So that looked
Film
like,
right there.
That looked like fun.
That was fun. So cool. Just what a cool film.
So that's the first space that we're seeing. That's the strip club where Ani works. Tell me about the how you guys did the production sound. Was it with music, without music?
This scene, if I remember correctly, was done without music. And this is one of the scenes that I fought to get their volumes up because, talent often starts to speak in a way that is natural to the space that they're in. And Sean is very particular about it. And also, everybody hates this. You know this scene very well when you're watching a scene and people are speaking quietly when they're supposed to be. The volume is so loud that they would be, just speaking into each other's ear, but they're speaking like we are now. So we were really particular about getting them to go up and up and up. And it sounds very real to me. So I think both production and post sound achieved, the illusion.
And so the music would cut right before they would speak.
I don't remember for this specific dialogue scene we did that. We did do that for several scenes, but I don't remember if that's something we did here.
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was either. Because I think this scene, it didn't have that party lead in. It was really just that dialogue scene. Uh-huh. That was kind of what we were there to get that. And so that's why we needed to fight more than usual, because we needed to feel like it's there, but
They didn't have that energy.
in service of
Yeah.
this. Yeah, but we didn't have the moment before, kind of. We did do scenes in the club with the volume on fully, and I'm sure Andy and John had to deal with whatever that could have entailed. The true punishment that might have been, I don't know.
Yeah.
We run the gamut basically of every kind of club scene recording mode because we spent so much time in this club and recorded so much.
Yeah. Andy, John, what were some of the things that you had to deal with on the production track for those scenes?
Like Boris mentioned, there's so many club scenes. There's, HQ is where Annie works, and within HQ there are multiple areas to the club. There's the main floor, which is where we just were in the clip. There's side rooms. There's an upstairs, which is more of a VIP area, and then there's back rooms even further beyond upstairs. And so all of those different rooms have their own sort of sonic signature based on their relationship to the main floor, which is where the music is the loudest and so on. And the crowd is biggest. And so we built a map of the geography of HQ. And yeah, Sean is like, well, this is what it's really set up like. So let's just use that as our guide. And so we mapped it out on paper so that we could all understand like the geography of the nightclub. And so we let that inform our choices in terms of the presentation of the different areas. And, the main room, obviously the loudest, the boomiest, you're rocking the subwoofer. There's multiple speakers in the space. Mm-hmm. So I'm treating the source music as a culmination of multiple speaker sources that are placed within the Atmos environment, right? Taking a page out of Michael Szymanek's approach in The Social Network, who's a fabulous re-recording mixer who I've adored his work for a long time. He did a YouTube clip, or he didn't do a YouTube clip. There's a YouTube clip of him speaking about his approach where he did exactly that, where there's this iconic scene in The Social Network that takes place in a nightclub. Same thing as we're doing here, actors speaking super loud. The music is composed for that scene, which allows it to bump up against the dialogue, and then it sort of musically dips to allow for the dialogue frequencies to come through. We don't have that luxury. We're just playing stereo, full tracks. We don't have splits. We don't have vocal ISO'd tracks. We just simply have the stereo master that you'd hear on Spotify or anywhere else. And so the approach is to take that, break it out into multiple iterations of speakers that are then placed within the room, some louder than others, some with different sort of frequency characteristics than others, one with a blown tweeter, what have you. That contributes to the realism, obviously. And to get that as loud as possible, to keep the identifiable nature of the track up, is that the bass line, is it the vocal, is it a melodic synth line? What element do I need to retain such that we can continue to identify the track as being that track and it's doing the job that it should be doing? Like, why was that track chosen? Can we maintain that? And then finding some frequencies that we can then sacrifice to allow the dialogue to just sit on top of. And, and I'm allowing, parts of the dialogue frequencies to be absorbed by the music such that there's always that sort of interplay between the two. So that was the approach there. And then there's several nightclubs throughout the cat and mouse sequence where we're chasing, trying to find Yvonne. All throughout
and I think
the city.
One of the tricky things in some of those scenes, there's music that we hear, but they weren't able to license that music. So we had to remove the music. But again, Sean loves to keep everything that's going on in a scene. So there's lots of tools we had to do, and the music was changing a lot. Like they were licensing and changing songs through the whole process. So, not until the final day was all the music set. It was constantly changing. Sean's such a storyteller, and so when he sees it all together and let's try this and that, it was great when they could license the song. And it was in we could hear it, but especially when I think it's Toros walks into the nightclub and they go in and there's this loud song playing. That was really tricky. We had to really carve around the dialogue and adjust the music so that the new music sat on top of the old beats and, make it all work.
Let's
Yeah.
dig into this because we actually are getting some questions in the chat here. So was the club set? Was it a set or an actual club? Actual club.
Actual club. There's almost no set in this film. Sean being a practicing film naturalist, there's very little set in his film. Next to no set, basically.
Interesting. Well, I want to touch on that later. And then how did you cut together different angles if the music was blasting? If you shot it without music, I imagine that was just an overlay. And by the way, listening to you talk, Andy, about how you sort of carve out frequencies, it's like an arranger, with a score, with a composition in music. You wouldn't stack all of the low frequency instruments at once in a score. You'd sort of make room for everybody. That it's like an improvisational dance. It almost sounds like, in terms of what you're obscuring, what you're allowing to come to fruition. So that's pretty great. And then I want to dig into some of this idea that you go into a real club. The scene is they're looking for the main character. The director wants to let the music fly to keep the energy of like going into this active club going, but you're recording dialogue. I know, as a production sound mixer, that makes me nervous. And you guys went with it because it was right for the story.
Yeah, I guess you could say in terms of workload distribution, this is not exactly a fair fight because I guess for us, I would say in some sense it's nerve-wracking because we're preserving less of the dialogue, but from a production approach standpoint, it's easier because we're doing this direct cinema approach where we're just getting what's happening, and then Andy and John have to make it sound like a real film because it's not going to be, a Wiseman type documentary later. Cool. So, and I love that kind of production sound approach. And that's why, I guess, to go back a little bit to your question about genre and style, this film, I think, is so cool for my taste personally because it's kind of the perfect intersection between like all of the true production stuff that happens in New York, this crazy like stealing shots, even though we're not really stealing anything, but that same like approach. And then on post, it gets the same treatment that an IMAX film would, that's been captured on a stage with an equipment rental that's a couple days of are worth the entire budget of this film. So it's like this perfect melding of production and post practices from, some of the rawest and most polished films combined.
Yeah, and truthfully, walking out of the theater, that's what led me to want to dig in more and learn more.
Yeah. So we treated it as we would in one of these raw films, and then the polish came from the geniuses in post who made it, made it look easy, I guess, for what we did, even though we just pointed mics in a loud room at people.
I'm going to tell a very quick story. It has to do with a photographer that goes to a dinner party, and the host of the dinner party says to the photographer, "Oh, welcome. I love your work. What camera do you use?" And then at the end of the dinner party, the photographer leaves and says to the host, "I loved your meal. What oven do you use?" So I say that
That's great.
I give that story as a warning because I want to ask you about some of the tools and techniques.
Yeah.
But I know, obviously it's so much more than just that. So you get these tracks with music over the spoken word. How do you begin to handle that?
One thing I wanted to say is Andy and I both come from a music background. We spent at least a decade each in the music industry. So we have that background, and I think a lot of the carving and crafting is a temporal thing and shifting things so they work. That's one of the big parts of the battle. Of course, there's the splitting out of the sounds. We did use some tools, that stem separation software that will take music. We also use some tools. I don't know how successful they were, but separating two people talking at the same time. There's like spectre layers we did for that. I think the stem separation software we used was called Remix. That was one of them. Andy tried a bunch of different tools on different things. I know those are two we used.
Yeah, the tools I use to answer the question with respect to the whole sort of photographer analogy is these tools right here. Yeah, it's like John said, like we come from a music background. I've been playing music since I was a kid. I've DJ'd in clubs. I've played in bands all up and down the Sunset Strip. I've mixed live shows from clubs to massive events, you know, at 100,000 watt turbo sound system in the middle of Philadelphia kind of stuff. So like I've kind of done a lot of that. And you know, I think as sound people, like we just listen all the time to what the natural world sounds like, right? And we have an understanding of our sort of emotional human relationship to sound in everyday life. I was talking to someone in another interview where we were talking about this idea of realism. And, you know, I made the point that depending on your state of mind, those everyday sounds, like in my neighborhood, there's these Pasadena parrots that circle my house every day at 4 p.m. They just do this loop. And on a bright, sunny day where I've got nothing much going on, I'm like, oh, I love the parrots. I feel like I'm home. Everything's good. It's beautiful. And then on a day where I've got a lot of stuff going on and I'm stressed and I'm trying to like hook up a Zoom and the parrots are going around, it's like, those damn parrots, shut up. You know, so we can reverse engineer that back into storytelling, right? It's like we're using natural sounds, realistic sounds, but it's how you present them that can you know, tip off like how we're supposed to feel emotionally in that particular environment. Why do we play the subways so loud? Why do we play the buses so loud? Why is the club so loud? Why in other moments are things not so loud? You know, so there's all kinds of trickery that we do as audio guys to inform the emotionality of any particular scene.
Yeah.
Even when the constraints are to be real.
Yes, that when the constraints are real, it doesn't mean there aren't creative choices. For me, that really reflected the internal turmoil of the characters. And one example I want to give without giving too much away that really struck me as I rewatched the film last night, right before Annie's about to go on the plane and it's become incredibly clear what this is truly all about. We're on her, and I think Igor is in the background, and there's just the sound of this jet engine filling up the space.
Active airfield where we shot, yeah.
Well, and so that's sort of these are sort of the moments that I think about, because like I know that sound like that could have been there, but it sounded perfectly placed and perfectly reflected like the fact that, you know, this is all sort of passing by her and you know, truly like her world is now collapsed. And so, you know, there's moments like that I really do feel the creativity coming out while still within the constraints of realism.
Yeah. You know, we used a lot of tools because we were kind of restricted to realism, and Sean's direction was not to be hyper realistic. Our sound design tools were limited basically to things that we might hear in each environment. The airfield, the placement of all of those overhead planes, and also the scene you were referencing there's a lot of wind going on in that scene naturally, and so we played that up as well. It gets pretty heavy wind there. All of that kind of to build up the tension of that part, and you know, it's subtle, so like, you know, if you're watching a horror film, you hear this drone come in or whatever. When you're in a film with, you know, pure realism and not being able to use any sound designy, score-like sound designy elements, it's really a matter of like playing up these different things and this tapestry and orchestrating that to match the arc of the emotional tone as it shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this stuff a lot, and I think one of the advantages to sound over picture, and this is a discussion for the group, is sound lives in the back of the viewer's brain, I think, and you guys really sort of used specific elements of sound to sit there in my brain, at least, which I appreciated. I think let's watch the next clip. Ani and Yvonne have met, and he's invited her to a New Year's Eve party, and she's brought along a friend, and this is sort of the introduction to his sort of like banging, I think is the word the characters use, world.
No fucking way.
Yes, fucking way. I fucking
Girl.
right? I know.
Girl!
And it's fucking insane inside. There's an elevator.
Oh my god.
Fucking elevator.
Wait,
Never seen anything
are my
like
tits
it.
off?
No, your tits look amazing. They look perfect. Wait, are my tits off?
No.
Ванечка,
This is Lulu.
очень приятно. I'm so excited that you are here and let's go drink. Are you ready? And Annie, your mouth. Йоу, это эскортница, которая ебет Ивана. Да ладно! Чай тебе. Хорошенькая. Нормально, мала, нормально. Чтобы эти не пришли армяне.
Никого не вижу.
Кстати, вот такого кокосика в Москве просто нет. You looks great. Yeah.
Thank you. You were right.
А?
You were right. This is banging.
Ah, yeah?
Yeah.
Having fun?
Yes. Are you?
Yeah, me too, exactly that. Я, кстати, хотел спросить. Ты сегодня ночью занята?
Maybe.
Что, блядь, maybe?
Well, it's New Year's.
И что?
I have holiday rates.
So much fun.
It's
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. First of all, I just want to comment on the cut between the dance to the fireworks, which I think it's hard to know, like, is that a picture editorial decision or did you guys nudge that on? But to go from those low frequencies of the thumping to the high frequencies of the fireworks is like just, it's a delight to listen to and to watch. On the production side, everybody wired. How many wires do you remember?
As often as we can, everybody wired. That was literally the first thing Sean said to me when we met in person on the Tech Scout. He said, hi, and then he said, I want to do it Altman style, everybody wired. So that was his request, basically. And then obviously in this film, there's some outfits we had to work around, and also the run-and-gun nature of some decision-making. You know, some outfits were getting switched out last minute. We weren't always afforded the luxury of, pre-wiring outfits or even knowing what they're going to be. But Igor's, for example, his black hoodie was pre-wired always, right, because he has one outfit for the whole film, and it's a very forgiving fabric, and it was like really, we figured out right away and we stuck to it. But for all the scantily clad women, we had to, sometimes we couldn't wire them, and then sometimes we could work around bits of their outfit. So it was, it was kind of like you do it on a little run and gun.
This answers Juan's question of how was the preparation of production sound team with the costumes. When you could, and sometimes it was all last minute.
Yes.
And this is an oven kind of question, but in terms of informing your decision to record 32-bit float, I am curious what recorder you used. What oven did you cook this with? Sorry. And
which typewriter was this film written?
Yeah, that's right. But also, I want to lean into the idea that 32-bit float was not something that you saw on a YouTube video. This really was because it was serving Sean's vision.
Yes, I see no downsides to 32-bit. I really don't understand why anybody would campaign against it. I think, first of all, because I would say from about 2/5 of this film in production. I mean, not in the final product, but in terms of what we were shooting, about just under half was very improvisational and explosive and run and gun. And I was alone mixing and booming out of a bag for about a third of the production as well. So I knew I wouldn't be afforded the luxury of making a mix. And I knew there would be, unpredicted screaming and things like this, very much in line with a more improvised run and gun production. So I would treat it this way. And I can answer this question very quickly. But
so the question is, multicam shoot, was your boom operator able to get in the shot, or was it mostly radio mics?
It was single cam, but still very crazy and improvised.
Yeah.
There was one day of multicam. It did not go as planned, so the plans were scrapped. There were plans for more multicam, but it didn't happen.
And did I understand this was shot on film?
This was all shot on 35. This is as nice as it gets. So that's what I was saying about the melding of the rawest and the most polished. Kind of we did it all. 32-bit was there to preserve the best quality, because I knew that there's going to be quiet moments where you're going to want to bring it up, and you don't want to bring that noise floor with you. You want to get just what you want to get. And then also I knew that there were definitely going to be moments that the limiters, or I guess 0, would be hit, and my hands would be holding the pole, and I would not be able to do anything. But if I said, if I gain stage it for the quieter part of that same take, then, we're not going to. Anyway, I wasn't able to, so I thought 32 was the way to go. And obviously, accounting for those scenes, I didn't want to mix and match 24 and 32, so I want to do the whole show in 32. Quite frankly, I just think it's the best way to go.
And I appreciate that. Was there any pushback from picture editorial? And then what is Sean and the executives looking at listening to for dailies at that point?
How do I say this delicately? I don't think anybody really cared, except for the very first conversation about, syncing dailies. Mm-hmm. The very first email I got was, "Oh, we can't do 32-bit," and I had to engage a little bit, because of course they can. It's just a matter of changing the workflow a little bit. They made it work, because the standard post ingest setup would be for 24, so right. They needed to do something that wasn't obvious. But my hope is, give it a few years and we won't be having these conversations anymore. It'll be a standard practice.
I'm still having conversations about shooting plates. I hope from your lips, I hope this is true. John and Andy, any thoughts about having the ability to not worry about overs or unders?
I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. I mean, to be able to preserve the dynamic range of the moment makes perfect sense to me. I mean, why limit yourself to a less dynamic recording than what is actually happening? I think part of Sean's decision making for choosing Mikey, I think a very small component was that in Once Upon a Time, that whole ending sequence. It's there's our screamer, right? So, I don't know, how many decibels she reached, on the day, but clearly she's incredibly dynamic. And as we've talked about previously, there's 5-6 people yelling on top of each other in any given moment. So of course you want to preserve those dynamics. So for us, the 32-bit float thing makes perfect sense. Pro Tools handles it just beautifully. It's a non-issue. I think we should all be doing it. When I'm out in the field recording sound effects, I'm always in 32-bit because you don't know what's going to happen, right? So
And not
full
just
endorsement.
the loud stuff, but all the quiet, because that's probably the most important is when we raise it up, the noise floor is much lower. And I think that's the high stuff, you still got to deal with clipping the transmitters, the mics, everything like that. So, but for all the low stuff, I think it's really important. And again, like with this film, you're Andy was dancing the volumes of all this dialogue. And so being able to pull all this stuff up and not have to, do crazy amounts of noise reduction to compensate what might have been there with 24-bit, I think that's one of the most valuable parts of it. And me personally, when I mix dialogue, I've mixed in 32-bit in Pro Tools for many years. And so
Yeah.
I'm all for it.
Yeah, one of the, I guess I can mention, one of the most like consequential, dramatically and sonically by proxy scenes in the film is when she's in the house and she was, abandoned by Ivan, and she's being held there by Garnik and Igor, and Toros shows up. And I was doing that scene alone. That was several days of that scene. So I was doing the dance, and I mean, I love that. That's like the most fun. That's a very fun thing to do as a mixer. You got the bag and you're dancing around, and the camera was handheld. So it was, that whole scene, not shot listed, not camera blocked, right? Kind of, just dancing around until they feel like they got what they wanted. We get this, we get this, we get this, and the scene changes a little bit. So, and there's a lot of dynamics. That scene is like jazz. There's a lot of quiet bits and loud bits. There are a lot of loud bits, but there's also a lot of silence and
there's a lot of funny comedic moments in the quiet bits that would be a shame to miss.
Yes, and the Russian is very funny in that scene too. There's a lot of funny language stuff, which because of how genuine it is, that it really works. Anyway, that's a great scene to I guess emphasize that 32-bit was a good choice, because it's a scene like that, I think, that illustrates the most. Because watching the film, you could imagine that scene being done very traditionally, being camera blocked, being shot listed, all the lines being prescribed very distinctly, everybody knowing everything. And then from a traditional production sound perspective, you could argue that exactly how to gain stage everything, so you can just do it this old-fashioned way. But it wasn't really like that. It was really done as if we were stealing for a student film in the middle of Grand Central, even though it was our location that we owned.
Sure.
And it's just moments like that I think make it worth 32-bit. And by extension, I think it's always worth doing it, just because we want to get the best sound possible to the post team, like John was saying, for the quietest bits as well. So I don't see a reason, even if this wasn't the case, I don't see a reason to go back. We should just, this is our standard now. I like it, and I think it's a good one for us to keep.
I love it. In those scenes, so first of all, I have so many questions. The house, I remember watching it in the theater, and I've recorded in those kinds of houses. It's this very, very grand mansion with so many hard surfaces, mirrors,
Lots of mirrors.
marble, just like crazy acoustics. How much did you have to fight that? How much did you guys fight it? Because what I heard sounded completely natural and it never drew attention to itself.
Story-wise, the mansion, conveys this air of opulence, right? And potentially plays into the whole sort of fairy tale for Annie. Like, oh, this is somewhere that I want to be. This is something to attain, right? And so in the first scene, we're in that foyer where she enters that grand entrance, and we're in there, and there's this beautiful reverb tail that is natural to that space, that is inherent in the boom recordings, right? And so immediately for me, I was like, oh, that I like. And when it's not present because of a different angle or what have you, I would just create it from the Lexicon 480. So I tuned the 480 to match the tail that was occurring naturally on set, so that if there were any lines that needed a little bit more tail, I would just dial that up on those particular lines, so that my center channel feels consistent based on that natural reverb tail that occurs in the space. Obviously that changes with different perspectives, but nonetheless, it feels consistent in center. And then I'm running a 7/0 verb that sort of matches to give us a little bit of splash from the windows and from the other hard surfaces that are in the environment. but yeah, so it's about again, like keying into something that's happening naturally on set, that feels right, that has that tonality that is going to say what needs to be said, and then matching that in with some other tools.
I mean, if I had to summarize that family's character, I would say empty opulence, and that's what that space,
Totally.
what you drew out of that space. I have this question comes up to me from time to time: is it worth it to record an impulse response on set?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll take them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, room tone would be nice too. Occasionally.
Yeah.
One interesting thing about the bedroom. So there was like I'm matching. Andy kind of sets a tone. We're matching reverbs and stuff. And there's a door close, and it wasn't quite working the reverb. And I was like, and Sean goes, "Oh, actually, that bedroom, the walls are like suede."
Yeah, that's a dead
or something.
room. Yeah.
It was dead. It was like, I was like, why is that door closed? Just sounds so dead. So it's really, how many suede walled rooms do you have?
That house for the New York heads, especially those who drive in New York, you'll know that when you go on the belt, if you're passing Mill Basin and you look to the right, you see the giant square house. That's the house. It's the house in the exterior of the film. There's the flyaway shot, and that's actually the interior. So it's genuinely the location. A low key landmark for those who know South Brooklyn.
One of the challenges that I know when I was coming up, I would be like, oh, if they're not on camera, I don't have to worry about them. And I think that is not a filmmaker's way to think about recording sound. There's some of the car scenes that, like, the framing is deliberately like cutting half of their face off so that you only see them, on the turn-ins occasionally. But sonically, they're so present. And that's a shout out to both of your departments in the sort of acquisition and the choices that you made, and then in the choices of who do we hear and how do we keep all of these voices straight. I also think, since we're talking about sound in general, casting is, made such a big difference for me, where you have this cacophony of voices, but you're always aware of who's talking because the voices are so distinct no matter what language they're playing in. There's a scene in the candy store when they return to the candy store. The first time we see it, it's like them having fun, and now, Yvonne is missing, and they have to go find them, and it starts out, like a dialogue, two people, like, have you heard from him? And then turns into all four people talking. You can follow everything along. So if you haven't seen the movie, go back and, watch the scene. And then it ends in just like an explosion of smashing and destruction.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
And then back to sort of regular dialogue levels.
Yeah, I wonder, Andy and John probably remember that scene because that scene is, it's like there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of, I'm sure there's many shots or many instances where there's no boom, it's playing on wires, and I'm sure there's many, I don't know how much re-recording was involved because there must have been a lot of bleed because they're all so close together. They're all getting really loud. We had, headroom problems. Booming it was a really challenging thing. It was like that was one of those scenes where you learn a lot,
Yeah, that particular scene, the candy shop scene, when it's at its fever pitch, there's 6 people all speaking at the same time, right? And to your point, Boris, there's proximity in terms of someone's mic. Like maybe Andy's mic is actually picking up Toros better than Toros's mic because of his heavy jacket, So again, it's just it's having all of those choices, right? Meaning having the boom, having all the ISOs that give me, the luxury of choice. And so you're just operating in a more sort of surgical manner because, it's not shot and cut like a conventional film, right? So thankfully, thank you, Boris, for delivering so many great tracks where I have that freedom of choice to sort of bob and weave between all the different mics to make sure that everybody gets their due, while also maintaining that undercurrent of chaos, right? I think we talked about this before. I don't know if that was off screen or on screen, but there's because there's a lack of score in the film writ large. We're often relying on sound design and/or the tonality and the nature and the orchestration of the dialogue for energy, right, and for propulsion. And so in those instances, that's a great example in the candy store, but also when we return to HQ, once they've located Ivan and we get back into the private room upstairs, and there's now like 7 people all, on top of each other at the same time, and everybody has a point to make, and everybody's point needs to be made, and so we need to make sure that we receive all of that information. But we must also maintain, again, that level of chaos, because it's important to maintain the energy. One of the things that's challenging in the presentation of theatrical sound is that once you've reached a level of energy, if you suffer a dip, it's very hard to get the audience back up to where you were. And so that requires, maintaining an even level of energy throughout. And so that just means, who's priority? Who do I need for this word or this line? And then everybody else has to just butt up against them. So it's different to a lot of traditional filmmaking where you're really just focusing on one character's voice at a time and then another, and they're just flip-flopping back and forth. They're having a conversation, or you've got all these people overlapping, and so it just makes for a much more, dare I say, surgical approach to the construction and to the mixing of those particular moments, to get it all to play, and then going back and saying, okay, now that I've got it all working, what can I do to sort of finesse it and make it feel a bit more like a dance and less like a sort of like angular, kind of constructed thing. So yeah, it's a wonderful challenge. Again, thank you, Boris, for all the great tracks, because without that freedom of choice, we would have been, in a very different position. So it really does start with the production. It really does start with the production mixer, and with everybody being wired at all the time. Was obviously the right choice, because it does give us that freedom of choice to be able to present the film in the best way possible.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And Brian was in there fighting for boom supremacy, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that scene would have been like for you if there was also a score. Granted, of course, it wouldn't have been as funny or as it wouldn't have been as effective. But from a technical perspective, I can only imagine what a nightmare that would have been.
Yeah, I think it's the sense of menace. That's something that's really striking in this film. Is you're always in the back of my mind wondering when one of them is just going to get so irritated and just take out their gun and end it. And yet they're still so incredibly funny. They're like clowns. On top of all that, there's like menace and circus sideshow energy. Yeah, I think
the same time.
That's why at the beginning I was like, you could say this was a romantic comedy, and it wouldn't be entirely the wrong genre, because they are, particularly in that scene in the house that really bridges Act 1 to Act 2, where Yvonne runs away. Yeah, it's laugh out loud funny.
Yeah.
But then pierced with, like I said, the loudest scream perhaps recorded in a Palme d'Or winning film ever. In terms of score, we have to talk about the last scene. And I think it does stand out because that is the moment where you expect there to be some score. Right? And what we have are windshield wipers, which is so much more brutal and stark. And I just wondered if you could talk about some of the sound design in that scene.
It's a scene that so many people have connected with and told us about, and the realism, the emotion that was captured on set, and we're able to use with the squeakiness of the windshield wipers. I also love the Mercedes has this sort of boop, 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 boop. It's not a, it's got a tempo. So there's all these tempo things happening, the pacing of the windshield wiper. And during the mix, we were able to make use of that and play with it. And we have to obviously keep in line with what's happening in the scene, but we were replacing things. We were removing some of the squeaks. We were putting it here, creating the arc of what would be score in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that happy accident thing is that on the day, obviously I don't want to ruin the scene, but there's snow falling, and so the windshield wiper that is active on the Mercedes at the head of the shot where there's very little snow is squeaking loudly, and it's grating and it's annoying. And then as the scene progresses and the snow continues to fall, there's more buildup on the windshield, and so the quality of the windshield wiper changes tonality, and it has a quite significant arc to it. And that was one of the things that I keyed into when we were first looking at that scene. I was like, that's a really cool sound. That's interesting. Let's go get all the bits from the day. And so we mined the various takes that were from that angle and that have the windshield wiper present. And we found that there's an arc where it goes from loud and annoying and grating and squeaky all the way down to sort of like a whisper, right? And there's all the stages in between. So we grabbed all those bits, laid those out from top to tail of the scene, and used the emotional context of the scene and what's happening for our characters to then inform us as to the sort of the placement of those individual bits such that they reflected the emotionality of the scene in a way that score might typically do, right? So that's one element that sits atop of the Mercedes, which has this ebb and flow to it, but is the sort of like base layer. And then on top of that, we've got all of the seat movement with inside of the car, all the leather squeaks that are another layer of sort of percussiveness that sometimes are very invasive and sort of shocking in a way, and then at other times are much more sort of calm and embracing, and dare I say, sort of nurturing and cradling. So trying to be vague because I don't want to give anything away to that scene, but it's one of those moments where there was something that happened on the day that sparked an idea that was super informative, that led us to go get all the bits and pieces of the day and be able to construct something that has a sort of arc to it that feels very score-like. And so again, it's sort of exhibit A of staying in the real world and using real world elements to tell a story that is supportive of the drama that's happening on the screen.
And I think we spent more time on that one scene. Probably, right, Andy?
more time
yeah, more time than any other scene, probably. Going back and forth, you know.
Yeah, it's a very delicate delicate balance tonally to get it to work.
Some say they're still working on it to this day.
It reminds me, and I really do feel this, like it will be talked about the way people talk about the ending of Apocalypse Now, in terms of like the ideas you have. Just the movie is, Anora is filled with music, and there's this tension of violence and sometimes actual violence and, you know, a thump to it. And then to end on this note of sort of like it's almost quiet. I connect it to the end of Apocalypse Now with Martin Sheen and the squawk of the radio at the end after this kind of like really loud, psychoactive soundtrack. It's such great filmmaking.
No, it's fantastic. And I love that it goes into silence, into the credits. That's one of
yes.
I just rewatched The Prestige, and obviously very different film, very dramatic, melodramatic at times. But the final scene ends, there's this huge swell, and there's dialogue. It's Nolan, so there's dialogue right up until every cut. And then it goes black for like, I don't know, half a second, and then the Tom York song comes on. And you have no time to sit with the profound twist that is revealed to you at the end of The Prestige, which is like, it's pretty messed up what happens. And I always found that so frustrating. It is like a film I really, really love, but it's so frustrating that you don't get kind of, the credits are treat it as kind of like, I don't know, like an afterthought, and here's a cool song that fits. And here, and so many people stayed. I've seen this film twice in theaters.
Yes.
So many people stay through that scene because it's so powerful, and the wipers have such a profound effect. I got messages from people, from friends all over, who aren't really, you know, the kind of audiences that pay a lot of attention to the sound, specifically about the wipers and the car sound, because it's such a, you know, that's the kind of the power of that scene.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the film doesn't end when we go to black. You know what I mean? It's like it's the continuation of that environment that allows the audience to catch up with everything that they've just experienced. In my view, you know, that's kind of how I see that working, and I think that's the reason for its strength. And like you said, Boris, like cut to black and then drop in a cool song would have been like so like disorienting, right?
Yeah.
So it was I think it was the right choice to stay with that and to give us all a beat to sort of like take it all in and digest what we've just experienced. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for putting that together. And I got to say, Russ, who was in charge of picture cars, and Brian and I were talking a lot about the cars as we were shooting, because there's two cars that are distinct characters in the film. There's this Mercedes, which even gets called out in this scene, where she says, this car is very you. And this Benz has very distinct sounds. Every part of it, I mean, this car was like falling apart. And the other car, it doesn't have such a sonic presence, but it is also a character visually. The Escalade, the white Escalade, the, you know, kind of the spiritual successor to Sopranos, to Tony's Escalade, because the newer model in the same color. And Russ and Brian and I were talking about how we really hope that they'll use the sound on the day from the Benz, from this final scene, because that's like the bulk of it. There's this engine and the wipers, and we didn't know, of course, because it was, you know, it was production and post wasn't happening yet. But then you could hear that there's a moment when the door opens and he runs her bags up, and you can hear the distinct sound of this car, like it's specifically this car. I'm sure it's embellished with the wild or maybe library sounds, but it's this. I mean, it's this sound, which is it's very cool from a nerdy perspective, and it's also very important in terms of Sean's, like, in service of the truth kind of narrative, because this scene is so brutal, kind of devastating, and it doesn't have all the flair and pizzazz of any of the other scenes, you know, that have the bombastic jazz hands, explosiveness.
It's a narrative truth as well as a sonic truth. Like, it's a perfect overlap. Did you guys record sound effects separately from the scene?
I mean, there was many things we wanted to record, but we just weren't given the time to. I remember that happening a lot, which is, you know, that's
often the case.
Often the case in most things.
Yeah.
You know, and hearing them talk about how a lot, you know, more is better, of course, but there's that, you know, balancing line that you have to, you know, that balancing act you have to play where it's like, okay, I'd love to get this, but we do have to move on.
Right.
And we are here to capture an image, and it's sound in service to the image. We got to get the image first before we can get this. But there were some moments, I think.
We got wilds of this car specifically. And also we have a lot of this car because this car, a lot of Cars stuff was done where I threw the bag in the trunk and the car we can wire any car now. We can wire a Soviet T-34 if you throw it at us, because we've wired so much.
The Escalade was really nice because it had all these handles that you could clamp onto.
Yeah, there's so much. There's so much for us to do, and we had, you know, some of it was all 50s mostly. 50s were some wired and wireless. And to go back to your typewriter question, my mixer and recorder is a Zoom F8N Pro, the latest iteration.
Comes out.
It's yes, and I want
the
to.
Truth is out.
I want to. I'd like to make this announcement because I think it's kind of important, because this is gear that I hear getting kind of frowned upon a lot, because it has this reputation of being prosumer equipment. But it's the heart of my bag, and I've had every version of the F8 since the very first one. Obviously, this new one, and I was always like, oh, if they could only add 32-bit, it would be like the perfect, you know, bag you could live with forever. And now it's that bag for me. And obviously, you know, the wireless are Electros, and there's all the other stuff comes from brands that are reputed as slightly more traditional, but the core of it is a Zoom, which is kind of like a, you know, blogger, journalist, YouTuber, whatever brand. But as you can see here, that was the core of our sound department in the trunk of these cars as we were recording them, while the camera was an RALT or something like that. So we were like, it was zoom from here, performing here with all the other equipment that's here. So that's just a word of encouragement to anybody who's like intimidated by the price tags of nicer gear, I think.
I love that. I really do love that, because it's not about the price tag at all. It's
Absolutely.
about how you use it. Yeah, I mean, it could have been a Radio Shack cassette recorder, and it's about how you use it to make it.
Well, I do want Andy and John to talk to me again, so I hope we'll draw the line a little bit before Radio Shack.
Yeah.
But in spirit,
Yeah,
yes,
same.
100%.
Please no.
But in spirit, yes,
Spirit,
very
yes.
much so, yes.
Fair. Well, look, I think we should come to a close. If you guys want to add anything before we go, Andy and John, or either of you guys, we can absolutely do that.
I want to give kudos to Boris, because there were so many moments where we're looking at the blocking of the scene and the framing of the camera, and I'm like, we should have a second boom here, and he was willing to with the bag on, pick up a pole and get an additional boom track. So it's very nice when you have a sound mixer who's willing to go a little further.
Yeah, well, you can't have all the fun.
No, you can't.
I tell everyone that the boom is the most fun job on set.
That's
'cause
why I
it's
love doing it.
It's the highest fun to like the stress to fun ratio is the best in that position. The mixer has a lot of stress and gets to have some of the fun. The boom up has less stress and gets to have all of the fun in the scene with the actors and the camera. And so, of course, any chance I'd get to get in there and dance around is great. And some stuff, there's not a lot of crazy wide stuff, but there was some wide stuff where people are screaming at each other that we really had to,
Sure.
strippers who are half naked yelling at each other from across a very wide shot. We got a double boom that we can't do it any other way.
Yeah, I wonder if the discipline of film, of a film camera, helped sort of keep the shots, kept it single camera, allowed you to know what the framing would be somewhat ahead of time. Is that?
It's interesting you say that. This was not the case here, despite the fact that this was shot on 35 millimeter and it's, kind of a smaller film, shooting, way over, and as we see now, overachieving ridiculously.
Very much.
There was no, the discipline was very much a video discipline.
Huh.
Cameras were often rolling through, director's notes being given, there was just a lot of film shot. There was like a Mikey and Nicky situation. So in that sense, I love the film discipline. It was not in practice on this show, but it's just in service of Sean's whole approach.
Sure.
Film or video, he's...
He
was doing rewrites every night. We got sides that had nothing to do with what we were expecting in the morning oftentimes, because he's rewriting every night basically.
And Sean, from what I understand, he's shot on an iPhone, which arguably is the Zoom equivalent.
Yeah.
And it's not about the camera, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. The feature I did right after this, I was very lucky to get the chance to work on a very small film. It was literally me, camera department of 3, and the director and the talent, and the DP was Jürgen Jürges, who is Wim Wenders and Fassbender's DP, old West German guy. And the movie was shot on an iPhone, and he was so excited about it. He was like, I can't, because the director was like, Jürgen, do whatever you want, and he was like, I want to shoot on an iPhone. It's in service to this super tiny run and gun thing. They bought literally 2 iPhones and 2, at the time, newest MacBook Airs to do, the dumping. And that cost less than like an ARRI package would for a half day. And that was the whole film. And this is like an old guy who's, he's like an old master. And in my mind, he would have this kind of unshakable respect for a certain kind of equipment. But he told me the opposite. He was like, I want to shoot on the newest, smallest, weirdest shit all the time. And nobody ever lets me, because people aren't, producers and clients aren't ready to take those risks. They're like, let's not experiment. And this director, this was a very personal film. The director plays the lead and wrote it. And we got to I had a bigger sound setup than the entire camera department. The camera department was on a gimbal or a handheld on whatever the newest iPhone was that summer. And I had my bag with electros and all sorts of stuff poking out. Right. So the tools, the tools are the tools. Everybody knows this.
Yes.
It's the saying that the tools are the tools is as trite as asking what the tools are.
Exactly.
All these points are, starting to eat itself.
That's right. Wonderful time to be a filmmaker, I think.
Definitely.
Well, I think we've come to a close. Andy, John, I have to thank you so much for taking part. Is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Boris, again for
Thank you guys so much.
everything. And yeah.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Thanks for your time. Thanks
you.
to Gotham TV for putting this together. Thanks to Neon. Thanks to independent cinema for making, bold choices and keeping our lives interesting. And thanks to Sean and thanks to Neon for having us.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian, for coming. Definitely a happy last-minute edition, and absolutely, Boris, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You
putting all this
were
together.
open to when I sent you an email literally from the credits, and thank you. Thank you all for watching. As always, if you have ideas or questions, put them in the chat. We'll get to them. Thanks for spending your Saturday with us.